Our first speaker tonight is Paul Jenkin from Ventura Surfrider. Let's give it up for Paul.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about our favorite surf spot. The mouth of the Ventura River. Everybody knows spots out there we call Pipes and C Street and the Point. But when you look at this image, you can see what happens on a good west swell, good winter swell. That's why we love it. These types of surf breaks are actually fairly unique to Southern California and, of course, other places around the world. But they're really special places, and that is what Surfrider, that's why our chapter really got formed, was to help protect this spot and to help make sure that we have waves into the future. So, go to the next slide there. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call our Managed Retreat project. And this is an awesome aerial photo. You can see right near the mouth of the river, you can see the retreat zone. All of that was parking lot. I think there's a picture coming up here in a minute, that's. Let me go ahead and go to the next slide. So, this is what it looked like back in the early 90s. It's kind of a classic Surfrider story. I showed up to one of the Surfrider meetings, and they were talking about the potential for a seawall being constructed, the length of the point. And a friend of mine was a beach cleanup coordinator and said, yeah, come on to a meeting. I end up at this meeting, and I said, I'm an ocean engineer. I know something about this stuff. Maybe I can help. So I think I actually ended up running the chapter for more than 10 years and starting this project and the dam project. So that's kind of the way it works at Surfrider. If there's something that you're passionate about and you really want to help make a difference, it's all you. Or in this case, it was all me. But I say that, but there's been a lot of people over the years been involved with this. So let's go to the next slide. Traditionally, engineers like to dump a lot of rocks and concrete on the beach to try and protect it when things start getting eroded. And this was a concept that was really, a game changer. This is something completely new, and it's really something that at Surfrider we've been verbally advocating for, this idea of, retreat. What we do in the future in response to sea level rise and what we do in response to beach erosion is going to make a big difference in the future as to whether or not we even have beaches. As sea levels rise and incrementally you start armoring the coast and you build big giant structures, seawalls and revetments, that actually makes it worse. Go back to that last picture. You can actually see here, these rocks were dumped up to try and protect the bike path and parking lot. And you can see what happens at the end of that structure where the rocks were dumped, how it actually makes the erosion worse. If they wouldn't have dumped those rocks, it wouldn't have been quite so bad. But that was the incident that, triggered the need to come up with a solution. What are we going to do to protect the bike path? Surfrider said, well, just move it back. Move it back. So this was the Managed Retreat project plan. I wish I had a pointer, and I can't really stand up and point, but yeah. But basically what you're looking at here is the area from the bathrooms, where the promenade turnaround is at the bathrooms, all the way out to the river mouth. The river mouth is there on the left. And this is, you can see in the yellow zone where there's a whole bunch of RVs and cars that were actually parked there during the fair. And then that yellow zone today is the retreat zone. So the new bike path got moved back about 70 feet on average, in some areas further. And the new parking lot was moved back with phase one. And if you go to the next slide, here we have an artist rendition from the early planning process. And you can kind of see what the idea was, to move far enough back that we could restore dunes and create that area for the beach to come and go. So, you know, the beaches change on a seasonal and annual basis. You know, some years when we get huge swells, like 2015-16, there's like no beach at all. And then miraculously, the summer comes around, the beach comes back. Now, if you've built something in that zone where the beach retreats and comes back every year, you interrupt that process and you actually make the erosion worse, and you start losing your beach. So here's our retreat zone, and if you go to the next slide, you can see that that's basically what we did. The vegetated areas, we have established dunes in that area, all native, seeded by Surfrider volunteers. Maybe some of you guys have come out. Have anybody here been out? Leslie? Yeah? Oh, yeah. So we've done a lot of work out there. In fact, we're going to have another work day in June to go. There's a non-native plant called sea rocket that came from the sand that was imported from Pierpont. And we kind of let it get away from us the first year, and there's so many seeds out there that we've been out there twice a year, every year, trying to pull all those little seedlings and sometimes big bushes full of seeds. So we got a bunch of them in February. We're going to do it again. We did it 2 weeks ago. We'll do it again in June. Okay? So actually the original project as conceived, I didn't have a picture of it there, was actually, I had a volunteer draw it up for me. I'm an engineer, but I'm not a very good artist. I actually had a guy who actually wanted to be a landscape artist, landscape architect, who drew it up, and that plan actually ended up being in part of the EIR that was done for the project. When we were kind of discussing this in the Surfers Point Working Group with all the different agencies and the fairgrounds, Kevin in the back over here volunteered to draw up the potential plan that we're thinking of for where to put the parking with additional retreat. So the area in blue that's closest to the beach here, does that look like blue? That's the area that has already been built. And the area in light brown next to it, along all the way down to the bathrooms, is where we're hoping to actually move the bike path back and finish the job. So this was part of the original plan, but we only got the funding to do half of it. Kevin actually used GIS, which is computer mapping, and went through, that's all to scale, counted up how many parking spaces there were, because it all comes down to parking. And turned out we can actually increase the number of parking spaces out there by doing this, because we have lost a lot, both in the upper parking lot, which wasn't quite configured right, and also in the turn-in area at the end of the parking lot. So I think we gained some parking with this plan. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, so I mentioned that December 2015 big El Nino winter that we had a couple years ago. I called the city engineer a couple times that fall and said, look, we've got El Nino on the way, and you guys haven't put any cobble out there, and you're going to lose a palm tree. Yeah, we don't have any money, we're not going to be able to get to it before the winter, blah, blah, blah. Storm hits. This storm was truly probably the storm of the decade. We had a massive gale in the outer waters that blew for a couple days, and that gale put probably 1 foot of storm surge on top of a foot that we had just from thermal expansion of the ocean with the El Nino. How do I know this? Because in the harbor that day, and it all converged at high tide, at the high tide of the month. 6.2 predicted, it was 8.2 in the harbor. So there was 2 feet on top of the high tide. Added to that, what we call the wave setup, when you have sets of waves that come up on the beach, and you've seen it when it's big, the whole beach will just rush up, and then it'll suck back out again. That wave setup, we call it, on top of that extra 2 feet. So you could actually consider that this was sort of similar to what we would expect with a large swell with 2 feet of sea level rise. But when we get 2 feet of sea level rise, we're still going to have storm surge, and we're still going to have thermal expansion from El Nino, so it's going to be worse than that. Anyway, these waves actually rushed in to Pierpont. You might have seen photos, or you guys might have been down at Pierpont to see that, just waves just rushing right over the beach and into the lanes. And you can see it also took out one of the palm tree planters, as expected, as predicted. And if you go to the next slide, I was in contact with the city for, a couple of months, and they're talking about what they were going to do, and I said, just don't dump rocks. Let's figure out another alternative. Let's see if we can hold some cobble in place or stabilize the shoreline. Then I get the call. This was actually right before Christmas. I was going to Mexico. I was leaving like the next day, and I get the call from the Coastal Commission. Yep, we gave them an emergency permit. So I called this, and then I told the city, I said, just whatever you do, don't put that geotextile cloth. So you can see here that black looks like a trash bag on top of that structure. The engineers really like to put that cloth in, and over the years, as the structure falls apart and unravels, you end up with all this plastic on the beach. It just falls apart. I mean, it's pretty tough stuff. It takes a while, but you can see here, this was just taken, 6 months out, and overtopping from waves that already exposed that cloth on the top. Apart from that, it's actually holding up better than it looked like it was going to that first year, but we also haven't had a lot of big swells since then. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the diagram from the alternatives report that was put together. The thing about an emergency permit is you don't just get a permit for what you did. You actually have to go back and analyze it as if you were applying to put in a new structure. So you have to go through an alternatives analysis, you got to go through environmental review, you got to go back and do all the stuff that you would have had to do to put it in the first place, with the only exception that typically the Coastal Commission is not going to give you a permit for a seawall or a revetment like this. But once it's in, you can go back and get the permit. In a lot of ways, this is really a loophole in the Coastal Act, and in fact, in this case in particular, and in most cases, the Coastal Act specifically says that this should be in response to an unforeseen event. And we knew this was coming, and I put them on notice, and sure enough, it happened, and boom, they gave them an emergency permit. This is something at Surfrider that we're watching real closely right now. Down at Old Man's at San Onofre this winter, State Parks got an emergency permit because it was getting up next to the bathrooms there. Boom. Giant, huge rock revetment's gone in there. Goleta Beach has been a classic example of these emergency permits, and Surfrider Santa Barbara has actually sued or threatened to sue or taken legal action against the county Those rocks, they put them in, they took them out, they put them in, they took them out, and then this last time they built it big. And if you go up there today, there is no Goleta Beach. There's grass. Actually, the grass is dead from all the salt water that came on top of it. There's dirt, there's rocks, and then there's more dirt. And then, of course, they dumped all the mud flow stuff up there. So Goleta Beach is just a disaster. Let's go to the next slide. Well, this is just a picture that shows the way that the city had been putting cobble out there to help stabilize the shoreline. And they put a lot of cobble out there. They did it probably 3 times or so over maybe a 10-year period. And they had gotten a permit to do this cobble nourishment, but the problem was there was nothing to keep it in place, and the swells would move that rock down along the shoreline. It goes down by the pier and all the way down to Pierpont. Now, there were some people saying that, oh, the city put those rocks there, and you guys remember the way it was in 2015 along by the pier. There was no sand at all, and the cobble was pushed up super high all the way down the beach. All that cobble didn't come from dump trucks because there's a ton of cobble in the system already coming out of the river mouth, but it moves down the shoreline, and that's why we have this problem here at the point where the cobble wouldn't stick around. So if you go to the next slide, we put together a small group of people who are really concerned about this, and we actually put together an alternative where we felt that if we could put in some rocks that are perpendicular to the beach, sort of like the groins down in the Pierpont Bay, but not sticking way out into the water, but just in the footprint of that structure where they had dumped the rocks. If we would have put like vertical lines of rocks, like of boulders, and filled in between that with cobble, that the cobble would stay there instead of getting moved down the shoreline. We're never really a proponent of structural responses, but the rocks we're in, it's like maybe we can go back and modify this and make it so it's not just a boulder field to climb over. At the end of the day, the city really didn't want to go through that much effort, and it was experimental and expensive. So the city's planning to cap the top of that structure with more boulders where that textile was exposed, and call it good. So it looks like that permit's going to go through. There's still some, you got to deal with the Corps of Engineers and the California Coastal Commission and the city. It's not finalized yet, but all of that will eventually go to the Coastal Commission. And I think Surfrider, we're going to go to the Coastal Commission and really make this another example of these emergency permits that don't end well. But our primary concern is what is going to happen in the future. We know there's going to be more erosion there in the future, and we don't want to see the whole coast just covered in boulders. So that's where we want the city to engage in some long-term planning and come up with some ideas on how they're going to do this, and go through a process where we don't have to come up with an emergency every time before something happens. Okay, finally, the next slide. This is the bumper sticker that our chapter put together back in 1995 when I first got involved with the chapter. Yeah, how many years is that? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, the thing was, I actually started, this was before PowerPoint. I had a slideshow. I had one of those slide carousels that I would go around and do these talks just like we're doing right now with slides. And I called it Growing the Beaches. And it was kind of the Grow the Beach campaign, really talking about the managed retreat and removing the dam. And so that was the original, how does any grassroots campaign start? Well, the bumper sticker, whatever. So, you probably see there used to be most of the cars that had these on have since gone to the junkyard. All right, go to the next slide. Oh, this is what it looked like this winter after the fires. You know, you guys saw what the ocean looked like. Well, the river was pretty black and mucky up there. The initial flush, all that ash came down. And then, if you remember, in January, we had 80-degree, 85-degree days for a month after this. And all of that stuff that was washed into the reservoir started to incubate. There was, there was a bunch of dead animals up in the watershed, especially a lot of rodents and things just didn't make it through the fire. I just know because I was out there hiking, and Sean knows more about it than I do, but my dog could smell these things. Dog would run 200 yards that way and find a dead gopher or a dead wood rat or something. Anyway, I think all of that stuff, plus the fish that were in the reservoir, there was non-native bass and sunfish in there that I think all that stuff died. 80 degrees, it all heated up, it's really shallow. And then all of that was still slowly pouring over the top of the dam and going out. So the river was literally brown and foamy for a month following this first storm event of the fire. The reason I'm saying this is that we always talk about the impacts of dams and how dams alter water quality and how dams alter ecosystems. And you know, this was a clear case. There's a huge impact from this following the fire. And the other part of this is that now that the whole watershed has burned, we're going to be getting a lot more sediment coming down the river and down the creek. Studies that we've done suggested that the reservoir would completely fill with sediment by 2030. I think we probably accelerated that. Probably, you know, a good El Nino winter, it's going to fill. They actually estimate that half the sediment that's trapped behind the dam was trapped there in the 1969 El Nino, which was shortly after a fire that was actually less catastrophic than this one. Okay, go to the next slide. And just going kind of back in time, 1999, we completed the first appraisal investigation on the dam. And the Secretary of the Interior under the Clinton administration, Bruce Babbitt, actually did a nationwide dam busting tour. And he went all the way around the country. And this is a photo that was in the paper. He was actually was in a crane, kind of removing a ceremonial big chunk of the dam. And you know, it was national news. We're taking this dam out, blah, blah, blah. And so that kicked off the next round of studies. The initial investigation was done under the Federal Bureau of Reclamation, and then at the time, the county felt that the Corps of Engineers was the best chance for getting federal funding to do a project like this. So if you click it again, we started doing more studies, and we did some more. I don't think that's even all the studies. Those were just the ones that I took the time to like screenshot the title. We have studied the sediment transport, the biology, the riparian habitat, the steelhead populations, the changes in the watershed when sediment is released. We've studied the impacts of the downstream infrastructure. We've looked at everything possible. And we kind of got stuck with the Corps of Engineers because the Corps tends to think real concrete. They like concrete. And this was supposed to be an ecosystem restoration project. And the Corps plan for dealing with a lot of that sediment was to actually dredge it and slurry it downstream in a pipeline and put it in the floodplain. Unfortunately, right on the Ventura River Preserve, which if you guys know where that is now, that had just been acquired. And it was finally, we had some trails that we could access, and they were going to build a 90-acre landfill of all this sediment. It also started getting really expensive once they went back and started looking at what it would take to put in these pumps, pump the sediment downstream, and then because there's not enough water, well, they're going to have to start recycling that water. So now they got to separate the silt from the water, pump it all the way back up to the reservoir, and create this conveyor belt. That alone started, reaching $100 million just for dredging and slurring the fine sediments out. So our $150 million project quickly went over $200 million and would require going back to Congress for reauthorization. And plus, the community did not like that. They did not like a landfill on top of their trails. Anyway, long story short, we went back, got another consulting firm to take another look at the whole process, and we had AECOM and Stillwater Sciences go and look and figure out that based upon the other dam removals that have happened in recent years, we can literally just use the river to blow that sediment out, blow that silt out, and it'll all go out to the ocean and take the dam out. So if you go to the... So this was, when we got stuck, this was the cartoon that was in Ventura County Reporter. And it seemed kind of ridiculous because everybody agreed that the dam should be removed. It's obsolete, doesn't store water, it's, not doing it any good. But I just like that little caption down on the right there. It's like, hey man, silt happens. And it's so true. The silt is just such a natural part of our system here. The river runs brown. Every time it rains, the river's running brown. I mean, the river transports silt. That's what rivers do. So this fear of silt and fear of how it would impact the water supply and everything is something that we were able to kind of get beyond, but we're starting the studies again. Go to the next. So this is kind of a picture of the picture of the dam there is Condit Dam. Did you guys see Damnation? See the film Damnation? If you saw Damnation, this is the Condit Dam where they actually blew a hole in the base of the dam and blasted all of that silt out. It went downstream, went out to the Columbia River, and it was gone. And just, the next season, there was people kayaking down right through that channel. The river restored itself. And that's the thing that we found, is that rivers can restore themselves and have an amazing potential for restoration. Next slide, please. Oh, that got in there twice. That's weird. Go ahead. So we actually put together a funding plan on how we would fund this without federal dollars or without the Corps involvement. That was something that the county was really interested in. We looked at the schedule. These are schedules looking at kind of 2025 or 2030 for dam removal, depending on whether or not the downstream projects are done sequentially or all at the same time. Go to the next slide. And when I say downstream projects, that all the studies that we've done have indicated that we've got a lot of insufficient infrastructure downstream. There's 2 levees, 2 bridges, and a water diversion structure, all that would be impacted by increased sediment in the river, which is going to happen sooner than we thought now after the fire. So these impacts are going to happen, and there's going to be communities greater at risk for flooding. And the water supply is going to be impacted if we can't do these projects anyway.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
Who made this map?
Good question. What's that? Oh, okay. Yeah, the question was who made this map. Another stellar Surfrider volunteer, Cynthia Hartley. And Cynthia, when she came to Surfrider, actually, I found her because she was interested. They came to Stream Team, and then they were talking to me, asking me about Surfrider, and I said, yeah. They said, what do you do? What do you need help with? I said, actually, I really need somebody who can do GIS. And Cynthia was like, Cynthia had been taking some classes at Ventura College and just kind of like learning GIS as a hobby. Now she teaches it at Cal State Channel Islands. So here's an example of somebody putting their talents or budding talents to great use, and then actually being able to make that into a career. So, okay, next slide. This is the example that we all look to. This is the Elwha River mouth up in Washington State. This is where 2 dams were removed in 2011, and now we have this massive delta has built up in front there. I went up and visited there when they were kicking off the dam removal project, and there was literally no beach at all there. And that upper left picture was right after they started taking the dams out. Now it's 300 yards. It's just a huge, giant point break out there, and there are seabirds out there. And then the thing that's been so amazing is that the coastal biologists have been diving and monitoring and just seen a huge rebound in the whole coastal ecosystem. It's something that wasn't necessarily predicted, but it's something that at Surfrider we always knew intuitively that, yeah, we got to just get these rivers flowing so these point breaks can thrive. But the wildlife and all the biology out there has also responded tremendously. So this was the Ventura River mouth. Drone image taken after the storms last winter, like 2017, right? And it's interesting, you can see the gun turret out there. You guys know about the gun turret that's on the other side of the river mouth, World War II. It gets exposed, it's usually exposed. It used to be in the dunes. Of course, the delta's receding, so now it's on the beach. Go to the next slide. It's a picture that I took after the last storms. That gun turret's buried. So we got kind of 30 yards of cobble and sand came out of the river mouth last winter, and now this year we kind of got all of that buried. It seems like there's more sand than cobble that came out this year, probably after the fires. The point here is that if we remove the dam, we would anticipate getting about 30% more sediment in every one of these types of events in the future. And that beach that was gone after the 2016 El Nino has now, bounced back to where the bike path that we thought was going to fall in last year now has, a big wall of sand in front of it. So. Okay, so we'll just finish with this slide right here. You guys have all seen this, but the story behind this is that bumper sticker that you saw, I really felt needed an update. I didn't want to reprint that 1995 retro bumper sticker, and I polled all of the people who are involved in the project, said, what should we, put on this bumper sticker? And I got everything. Everybody wanted something. Take out the dam so the river can run free and the fish can swim to the ocean and the sand will be on the beach and everybody live happily ever after, right? I mean, this big, and at the end of the day, I think, this is the new millennium. I'm not I'm not that social media savvy, but I know that everything is a soundbite now, so just scissors. So that's the stickers that probably a lot of you guys have or have seen. And that's the movement that we are after now. So it's up there. The scissors were, yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. The scissors were painted on the dam by someone. Yeah, if you watch Damnation, the whole story's there. There's a long history of that kind of protest art, if you will, on dams. So, do you want to do questions or? Yeah. I'll repeat the question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have any questions I can ask. Yeah.
If the dam were just to somehow structurally give way, would anybody be in any danger?
Oh, if the dam collapses, what happens?
I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, most likely scenario would be an earthquake. Matilaha Canyon is a very deep, steep canyon, and if you've been up there, you know that all the geological layers are not flat, they're going this way. There's a big fault that runs up there, and an earthquake would not be an unlikely scenario. It would not be an immediate disaster until the rains came. So, and you never think that those kind of things will happen, but it's kind of like with Montecito this year. It's like the fires came and I go, oh man, this isn't even the worst. The problem is going to happen when the rains come. So chances are if the dam was, let's say, mortally wounded, that winter we'd probably have a big El Nino and you have a massive flood and the dam could collapse, which would put people in danger downstream. Like I said, we've identified that with increased sediment transport, there's a couple of neighborhoods that are at risk. Partly because there's a bridge there in Oakview that's too narrow to take all the sediment that's come down the river, so that would back up, flood that neighborhood. So yeah, there's definitely a risk there. Yeah.
You said one time they were going to try to blast holes in the bottom in 2020 or 2020, I think.
Yeah. So that was my thing. I was like 2020. And this was in 2015. It's like, we could easily like blast holes in the base of the dam by 2020. Why not?
Yeah, what's the worst thing that could happen if something just did that?
Yeah, the worst thing that could happen is, we'd have some flooding downstream.
That's what kind of like my question. So how do we inform the public? Because like right here is like a great venue, but there's only like so many of us here. What would you say is the way to inform the public about these kind of concerns or issues?
Yeah, the stickers.
Stickers?
Yeah, that was, and I'm sorry, I forgot. I've got T-shirts too. I forgot to grab stickers because of my arm. I'm kind of like gimping around.
Injured mountain biking, right?
Yeah, I totally crashed.
Sorry. Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Dan?
So, as far as helping out, some people have time, some people have money. What's the best way to donate?
This is such a long-term campaign. I think, the best thing, like I said, is to get those stickers out everywhere. You get the T-shirts, spread the word, let people know that, we want this to happen. And, at some point, I really think that our elected officials and the people who are making the decisions need to know that this is something the community is really behind. And, we know that there's a big groundswell of support for this, but it doesn't appear to be a major priority right now in local government.
Would petitions be a good thing? Like for everybody to sign a petition, or would that not work before?
Yeah, petitions are, one way of trying to, get that across. We're always waiting for like a decision point, an action point, but we're in study mode. So now we're doing more studies. We're actually just starting now. We actually helped write a grant. We got $3.3 million from the state to do the next round of studies, and that was approved last May, and the contract just got let, and it looks like the consultant is just starting this month. So we're almost a year into our 3-year grant, so we're already a year behind.
What do you think about how is Lake Casita not filling up related to the dam breaking, or getting the dam breached? And do you think the water system, hooking up to the central water system and getting rid of Lake Casita is part of the long-term strategy for the river?
Oh, that's a much bigger topic. I can't go into too much detail, but the question was regarding Lake Casitas and dam removal and hooking up to state water and all these other drought contingency measures. In brief, there is a diversion dam that I mentioned, the water supply, the Robles diversion diverts water into Lake Casitas. And They didn't divert much this year because the water was so bad and so mucky, and there was so much ash and sticks and everything else coming down that they couldn't divert a whole lot. But it also turns out that that diversion is sort of 20 to 30% of the Casitas water supply. The rest of it comes down from the watershed all around. So Casitas is definitely impacted by the fires, getting a lot more silt, ash, and other material in there. With the dam removal project, we would want to try and modify that diversion so that we can flush sediment through during a big event so that it would naturally clear all that stuff through. Because right now, that diversion still traps sediment, backs up. They got to go in there and dig it out every year and put that downstream or get rid of it. So it was kind of make it more maintenance friendly. So that's part of the project. State water is a whole other thing. I won't go into that right now, but we're definitely looking at various drought contingency measures in Ventura.
Isn't there a financial justification for removal of the dam given the need to build beaches as opposed to revetment?
Yeah, the questions that, it would seem that with the need to get sand on the beaches, there's a financial reason to take the dam out. And yeah, we've tried all those economic arguments. It's the fact of the matter is it's an expensive project and it's a very complex project, and it just takes a really long time to get these things going. And in my mind, the downstream infrastructure need is even more of an incentive than, for us, the beaches are important. And obviously in Ventura, the beaches are really important, but there's also a lot of downstream infrastructure that we can bring in outside funding. So rather than entirely have to fund that locally, the reason it's not getting done is because there's no money in that zone 1 of the Ventura County Flood Control District. But we're shown that we can bring in significant outside funding, primarily from the state. There's a lot of Prop 1, and there's a lot of other state grants coming down the pike that we could apply to this problem. It's just getting everything ready, what they call shovel ready, so we can get that funding and bring it in.
Do we take donations for this? Like, where do we take donations for the Tallahassee project?
Donations for the dam? We have a separate bank account set up at Surfrider for the Matilaha Coalition, and we can take donations that go towards all the work that we're doing, so that would be appreciated. Are we done? Yep.
Downstream areas, there are actually houses living in areas that might have to be bought out and removed, or is that not really an issue?
Yeah, the question's about downstream residents and other properties and what happens to that. So that's why a couple of those levees are part of the project. And then there's also other areas where there's agriculture. I think there is a couple of other residences, and all of that's going to have to be worked out. So, those are the really tricky bits, because if landowners don't want to sell or give an easement, then something has to be worked out. So that's a good question. One more. Last one. Oh, 2 more.
The consistent lesson throughout all of this is how the extent to which and the impacts of human intervention in natural systems. We just jacked it up left and right, whether it's at the dam or in the river or along the shoreline. And until we can convince folks who are planning and spending resources to deal within the systems, we're going to end up doing the same things over and over. We saw there's something that you can do is talk to your elected officials and encourage people in decision-making positions to think about this as a system and not a 500-foot stretch of beach here, but the entirety of this coastline. And to think more expansively, more systemically about it. That's the key to actually getting something.
Yeah, so So Brian is speaking my language now. This is what we call this is what we call ecosystem restoration. This understanding that everything is more connected than we ever really realize, and I think that's what happens. People don't, 100 years ago they didn't realize that we were heading down this path, and now backing out of it is pretty complicated process. But there's no question that in the long run, it's cheaper to restore ecosystem processes and to, reap the benefits that nature can provide us than it is to try and work, against the grain. So that's definitely what I think the take-home message is here. And the other message that you said is that your elected officials need to hear this and understand that we get it. Why don't you get it? One more, yeah. Phase 2 of the managed retreat, the update there is that we have had several meetings in the last couple years with the working group. We have actually worked with Brian and with Beacon to apply for a planning grant to hire a consultant to do the final plans. We just submitted that a couple months ago. At the same time, the city is looking at hiring a consultant in the interim to start to move the ball forward. I still don't think we have 100% support from the fairgrounds. And so there's still going to be, that's why we did that analysis of how many parking spaces there were and how many we could get if we did it right. So it's still a ways out, and I kind of feel like we need the bike path to fall in to get that urgent sense of urgency to the project. So, very good. Thank you all for coming, for listening. I'll be hanging out here in a little while, but Leslie.
On your point of elected, the county is doing their general plan update process right now, and they need input from people about environmental issues. You guys want to look at this?
Leslie is talking about the county general plan update and opportunity to engage there. So, okay, good.
Thanks, Paul. Here in Ventura, we are really blessed with great surf, great weather. We're also really blessed with certain people that really put forth a lot of time and effort to make sure we still have these wonderful playgrounds, accessible year in, year out. And some of these people are humble leaders that can gather really smart people around them to help push this venue forward, and that's Paul. So next time you go surf the point, and you take a walk and enjoy that man's retreat, that's in large part because of Paul. That dam that hopefully goes down, all that energy because of Paul. If we didn't have Paul, we wouldn't, the managed retreat is actually one of the nationally recognized means for handling sea level rise. And that's our surf spot, that's because of Paul. He'll never say it. In fact, he told me before he was coming up, just not say much, but you can't because the guy took a dig on the bike and is here 3 weeks later talking about the same fight he's been doing for decades. So thank you, Paul.